Welcome to Darkwood Brew. I'm Chris Alexander, your host, and Darkwood Brew is a convergent point where people of faith gather together to talk about life, to support each other, to encourage each other through that journey that we all share through the dark wood. And we're glad that you're here joining us tonight. I'm here with Eric Elness, who is going to help me celebrate the fact that I got to pick the cookie this week.
Yes, and it's a delicious cookie indeed.
These are awesome.
Yeah.
These are oatmeal coconut crisps, and they're wonderful.
The recipe's up online, I take it.
Yeah.
All right.
And then these are my favorite cookies, and they're really easy to make. You can make them 15 dozen at a time.
Wow. Thanksgiving's coming up, too, you know. It's time, the house full of people, you know. Good
exactly.
Cookie. Go to Darkwood Brew for the best cookie recipes.
You're going to need a bunch.
That's right.
And tonight we get to celebrate by starting a whole brand new series.
Yeah.
It's called Dwelling and Indwelling, the House That God Built. And we've just come off a 6-week series where we saw God making a way out of no way. And now we have to ask the question, now that we have a way, what do we do with it? What is the way that we live together? Once we know now that God is a God that wants to participate with us, God exists and wants to be with us, how do we have that relationship? How do we live into that relationship? And this house that God built works with a whole series of Old Testament stories that give us some clues about what that living might look like. So we are calling those stories pillars, or those clues pillars, right?
Yeah, you can really take this kind of down to a very intimate and personal level when you have, by whatever experience it comes, this real clear sense that there is a God and this God is aware of us and is really at work in our world, and not just in our world, but in our lives. It's kind of like this, whoa, really? And then there's that way that's been made out of no way, and then you kind of want to say, well, this kind of changes everything. This kind of reorders my life. How do I shape my life in order to continue in this relationship? That's, in a sense, how do we build this house? Now, it's make a house for God, but it's a house that we ourselves inhabit in relationship with God. And these stories really lift out some pretty key principles that have been withstood the test of time throughout Old Testament history and affirmed in the New, and ever since.
And this marks our second series that we're following the narrative lectionary schedule. Yeah. So for those of you who are following with us on the narrative lectionary, it's absolutely wonderful to go online to workingpreacher.org, to Facebook has some support groups with narrative lectionary. There's all kinds of ways that you can follow together with us. But we hope that you will journey with us on our series for the next 6 weeks as we study these things.
Yeah, and we're partnering with Marcia McPhee and her Worship Design Studio. So if you're interested in worship resources specifically for narrative lectionary, worshipdesignstudio.org is a great .com is a great place to go too. So.
Now I'm really excited about this series because these stories are some of the best. But we have a lot of people that are joining us, right, to talk about these stories. It's not just you and me. We'll have some special guests.
Yeah, we got some great people. We're still actually firming up our complete guest list for this series, but we have actually one of the narrative lectionary's co-creators, Rolf Jakobson, Old Testament scholar from Luther Theological Seminary. He'll be joining us. We also have an old Darkwood Brew favorite, Frank Schaefer, who has really made quite a pilgrimage from one end of Christianity to the other, and now finds himself very much in Darkwood Brew territory. And then also Rachel Hockenberg, who is a United Church of Christ minister, whose name I seem to be seeing everywhere these days.
She is popping up all over.
She's writing books. She's leading, revitalizing churches. She's consulting with the Center for Progressive Renewal. She's doing all kinds of great stuff.
She's been writing blogs for quite a while on some consulting blog groups that have just been phenomenal. So I'm excited to meet her.
Yeah, she's got a new book coming out on the spiritual path too. We're very excited about. So yeah. So we still got one more guest to announce, but can't announce it yet.
But we can't announce. Surprise. Yeah. Tonight, though, we're specifically dealing with the narrative of Nathan and David, King David in this particular case, right? So let's take a look at exactly what kind of... No, I know.
The thorny theological question. Yeah,
that's
right.
We're missing. Since we've begun following the narrative lectionary, we've adopted this practice of asking each one of our narratives a question so that we have a way into the story. And we're calling that our thorny theological question. So Eric, what is our thorny theological question for David and
well, this one got
Nathan?
some good discussion on Facebook and also in the Darkwood Brew planning meeting.
Yeah.
And that is, what is the second mistake? What is the second mistake that makes the first mistake worse? Have you ever made one of those mistakes?
Kind of like the Mr. Bean video, right?
Yes, exactly like the Mr. Bean, basically everything Mr. Bean does.
And I'm assuming that there must be something in the story that gave rise to that particular question, right? So shall we turn to our Numa Divina and get a glimpse of what happened?
Sounds like a great idea.
Tracy?
From 2 Samuel chapter 12, verses 1 through 9. And the Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said to him, There were 2 men in a certain city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. He brought it up, and it grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat of his meager fare, and drink from his cup, and lie in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was loath to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the wayfarer who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared that for the guest who had come to him. Then David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. He said to Nathan, As the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. He shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing, and because he had no pity. Nathan said to David, You are the man. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. I anointed you king over Israel, and I rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your bosom, and gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have added as much more. Why have you despised the word of the Lord, to do what is evil in his sight? You have struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites.
Now we're talking about the house that God built here, and I'm taking it that a house is a metaphor of some kind, right? Are we talking about a literal house? Or are we talking about a church sanctuary?
No, the house is really a metaphor, for a place in which we and God live together, the community of God. And of course, there's also an allusion to the house of David. I mean, this is the kind of the primary house in the Old Testament, the house of David that sets up and continues on through Jesus, actually. But it's really about what are those pillars that when they're set into place, they hold up the roof over this whole relationship between God, between God and us, and who's designed this house and how is it being built, and this narrative really serves as a kind of a helpful jumping off point to that.
So to extend that metaphor of the house, where each house is built on some kind of a foundation, right? And we've already talked about the pillars a little bit. What about this foundation? What is it that would be the foundation of this particular house?
Well, if you're going to take it from this story as a foundational story, it's rather surprising, actually. I mean, here's a story about the king of Israel, and not just any king. This is King David, the very first king who united Israel together as a united monarchy, and then became known ever since as the greatest king who ever lived. I mean, it's so great as David that like every single time there's a new king arises and then departs this earth, the narrator will say, well, he was a really good king, but well, he was no David, or he was a really bad king, nothing like David. They're always going back and comparing to King David. So David is like the archetypal, like the person you want to be. And yet, you heard the story. Here's a story in which the king, the guy with all the power, is being accused of adultery, called out by the prophet Nathan. And you think about that. In the ancient world, when does this ever happen?
Yeah.
When a king is just called on the carpet for unethical behavior, I mean, in any other situation you can imagine, that person, that prophet's head would have been cut right off. But not only is Nathan kept alive, but he's valued by David. And not only is he valued by David, but this story actually makes it into the literature of the Bible. It was kept and it was preserved. And not just this story, but all kinds of stories about David that make him look incredibly great, but also show his kind of thorny underside and his seamy underside that is not so great. And it really gives you an incredible nuanced picture that you just don't find in the ancient world. You don't even find it today. I mean, what political leader publishes all the trash about, or allows to be published all the trash? You're usually trying to suppress it. Right? But this is a fundamental shift, actually. This story really represents more than itself. It represents a fundamental shift that took place within world civilization and the literature of world civilization that actually took place as a result of Israel's going from polytheism to the shift from polytheism to monotheism. Wow. And now that connection may seem like, wait a minute, how do you go from polytheism to monotheism and get stories about kings sleeping with other people? But what happens is in the ancient context, the stories that have been told up until Israel's day in the lands around, where you talk about Egypt or Greece or Mesopotamia, all the actions, the great dramas, they didn't take place down here on earth. They took place upstairs, up in the heavens. The action all took place among the gods. They were the ones where everything happened, and we were just simply, kind of had to be beholden to whatever happened up there. Whatever happened up there then very much affected our lives, but all we could do, we had no agency. We had no ability to overcome that. These were powers beyond our control. We had nothing to do with them other than to, they could interact in ways that they saw fit with us, usually to our detriment. And that's all we could do. But with the coming of monotheism, and you had this in a polytheistic world, what you have is a divine council. You have a high God, and there's all the other gods who sit around, they make decisions, and the high God kind of says, here's what I want, but not all the gods necessarily agree with that. Right. And so you have this bickering and infighting, and that's where all these great myths come from. Some gods splinter off, and then they come back at war with the gods, and they're trying to stab each other in the back, and all these different things. I mean, that's where the drama is. But now... Even
the Disney, that's in Hercules, right?
Yeah, you see, absolutely. It makes good entertainment. Even to this day, it makes good entertainment. However, it doesn't make such a great life.
Right.
It makes great entertainment, but when that entertainment is basically disempowering you, robbing you of any kind of agency,
Even in Hercules, he had to become a demigod to be able to interact, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So here we have the shift to monotheism. Suddenly, you have the heavens are quite quiet, And actually, in David's day, it's not quite monotheism yet. They had a belief that there were other gods, but they felt that in contrast to the polytheists, they thought that Yahweh was so powerful that all the other gods could only serve and do the will of Yahweh. So it's like one God, effectively. But that divine council is pretty quiet, pretty peaceful. God says, thus I say, and the other gods would be thought to carry out those words. So that's why they weren't worried about the gods of other countries, because those gods basically could only serve Yahweh if they're real. So what happens is with this shift, the whole drama goes from the heavens to the earth. And suddenly human beings are taking on the roles of gods. That's where the action is. They realize that there's still a divine council and all that, except it's God. Yahweh is the supreme ruler, and guess who's here to either agree or disagree or to carry out the will of God? It's us. And so suddenly you have this literature that sounds like the great mythology of old, only it's applied to human figures. You read the story of David in 2 Samuel, and it's incredible literature. It's riveting literature, and you know that the stakes are high, and the decisions, every decision just matters a lot, and you see the reverberations of all that. It's the same kind of stuff that they used to thought happened only up there. They realized, oh, wait a minute, we have roles to play. You can hear Psalm 8 kind of resonating in the background. Oh my God, you've created us just a little lower than gods.
Right.
Who are we that us, and yet, yes, us.
And in that shift, even the role of the king shifted, right?
The role of the king.
To be able to
yeah.
hold a king accountable is a whole new thing. But in that sense, the king is one of us as a representative of God, and we need to hold that representative accountable for part of our discussion and our participation with God. Right?
That's a really good point. So it's not just simply the action shifts down and now it's the king, gets all the glory. It's actually the king is just a member like us of the divine council.
Right.
and so the only person who has true power are the people who represent the will of Yahweh. And so a king, just because he's a king, does not make him any more powerful in the eyes of God or in the eyes of what they're seeing going on. And so somebody like Nathan could say, wait a minute, the plan for the house says, the wall goes here, and you just completely knocked that wall down and built a different one. And that's not part of the plan, and that was respected. Because it was understood that the king is not simply the word of the divine there, but the word of the divine has gone out, and we are all meant to discern that word and then learn to build that house together.
So whoever stays true to that word is the one that carries the authority of God.
Exactly.
And that's what the role of the king becomes, that idea of shepherd even that David brought with him to his kingship, right, was the leading of the people, but as one of the people, not as the word of God, that all people have the ability to be true to what God's design for the house is all about.
Yes, and so you see this radical upshifting of the human dignity and worth in the Hebrew conception. And you see now what will happen from David on, really from Saul on, is the role of the prophetic office becomes important too. It's like they are constantly then challenging the king, because the political power always wants to have it back where basically the rest of us don't have much power, and the king, the human in the old conception of things that did have power was the king, because the king was the vocal piece of that high God. Now the king is decentered in that whole role, but the political power always wants to have that power back. Center all the power in him or her, and so the prophetic office keeps representing the new conception of things. This is a radically democratized world now.
That is a huge dramatic shift.
Yeah.
So how does this dramatic shift in that time affect us in our time?
Yeah, well, one thing just before moving on to that I would note too is that you see the role of ethics suddenly become really, really important too. Moral behavior, and that's been a strain within Judaism since the beginning, and it's also because of this shift. Because you think about your life, like when times go hard, back in the day, back in the polytheistic day, when times turn low on you, or just take, say even not just as individuals but as communities, take to the 2008 economic, the bankruptcies and the collapse, Well, in the days of old, you would have looked to the gods. Well, what happened upstairs that caused that?
Right.
It was caused by that. Powers beyond our control, that caused those things. Or life turned down for me. Well, it's because some god, wasn't powerful enough, or some person sent another god after me, or I got in the, you blame it on the gods. But now there's one God, and this God is loving, considered loving, and the creator of everything. Well, now when life turns down or the stock market crashes, you can't just simply say, well, God did it. And so you're turning into an inward view. You're saying, well, what have I done? What role have I played in this? I'm an agent in this. And so there's this fierce interiority, and then an acceptance of critique like this, because they're seeing that inner critique is helpful now. You can't just cast off all your problems on the gods. You can't just cast off the worldwide economic crisis on the movement of deities. It's like, well, what did we do to create that situation? Let's take a hard look at that.
And you have to be intentional about watching what you do and the decisions you make as to how are you participating in what's going on? How are you affecting your own life and the life that's being lived by your decisions, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, the way this story plays out, I mean, not everybody's necessarily familiar with the narrative too, but the whole thing that led to this critique, really starts in the springtime when the kings like to go to war. That the Bible says that, it was springtime when the kings go to war. It's not too hot, not too cold.
March
it's
25th.
Just right for killing people. And so David is a king. He has his troops out to war against their old enemies, the Ammonites, who had been afflicting them for a long time. He sends them to Rabbah. And as they're out there fighting, David's back in Jerusalem, and he's just wandering his rooftop and sees Bathsheba. And this beautiful young woman, and she's bathing, performing some purification rites after she had just after her period and menstruation, and he's smitten by her, and so he sends for her, and she comes over, and the Bible just kind of makes a very long story short. Says he slept with her, and then she went home. Next thing David knows, discovers she's pregnant. And the problem is that she's the wife of one of the soldiers, Uriah the Hittite, who's out battling with the Ammonites presently. So David's got this little problem on his hand.
First mistake.
His first mistake, yes, sleeping with somebody else's wife, getting her pregnant. And so instead of kind of coming clean at that point, David tries to cover things up. So he sends word out to Joab, his military commander, to send Uriah the Hittite out back to Jerusalem from the front. And Uriah comes, not knowing why he's been summoned, and David just kind of says, I just want to find out what's going on, and hey, why don't you spend the night, go home to your wife, let her, he said, wash your feet. And he sends these, some wine, some cheese, grapes, all that nice stuff, kind of make a nice romantic dinner and all that kind of stuff. But Uriah won't have it. I mean, his mates are out on the line. There's no way he's going to go back and talk about, how he slept with his wife and had this great food and stuff. He sleeps on David's doorstep, the doorstep of David's castle and his house, and he will not go there. So in the morning, David's like, distraught, why didn't he go? And he finds out. So then he says, well, stay another night. And hey, why don't you come have dinner with me first? And he makes sure that Uriah just gets, snogging drunk. And okay, now he'll go. But he doesn't. So the next morning, David's even more distraught. And so he says, he creates this note, instructions to Joab to be carried by Uriah's hand, by the way, but he seals the note, saying, okay, when Uriah gets back, go into battle, and wherever the battle is heaviest, send Uriah out there, and then give the command to all the rest of your troops to step back and leave him exposed. Joab's no fool. He knows, this guy, for whatever reason, is not long for this world. But Joab is a very fiercely loyal commander to David, and so he does that. And in the process of doing that, he's got to get the troops so close to the walls of Rabbah that the archers just, have a field day, and all kinds of Israelites are killed, not just Uriah. And so Joab's now got to send this report back to David saying, boy, we had heavy losses here. So he says to the messenger, okay, report the losses, but if David gets mad, say, oh, and Uriah the Hittite died too. And he probably will calm down. And sure enough, that's what happens. And so
mistake number two.
Yeah, mistake number two just becomes this really, really deep trench that David ends up digging for himself, and unfortunately a burial trench for not just Uriah, but for a number of people. And how oftentimes, when I think about modern contexts, how oftentimes do we make that first mistake and it's bad enough, but then when we try to cover it up or we don't admit it, we do something. We try
to deny it.
Yeah, deny it. In gambling, there's the term double down. You lose something. Well, I'm going to double down now, make my old losses back, and then you end up, getting it in far deeper. It becomes a terrible problem. So that's kind of the background of that story, and a reminder to all of us. When there's a great line by C.S. Lewis. He says when it comes to progress, making human progress, he says, We all want progress, but if you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking back to the right road. In that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive.
Okay.
I think that's pretty sage advice. And how oftentimes, this relationship with God, it's not like God flashes neon signs and says, here's what it means to be in relationship with me, and here's where I'm calling you, just look over to the flashing dot, or something like that. Follow the bouncing ball, and there's your path. This is about clearing out the static, getting quiet, trying to discern the still small voice, those hints of intuitions, those aha moments, those light bulb kind of things, those times when things click into place, suggesting the next step forward and stuff. And it's not a precise science. None of us ever get it right 100% of the time. Most of us in this whole spiritual discernment work feel like we're damn fools, most of the time. And if you don't develop this healthy discipline to say, I thought I was right, I thought I was acting, in my best interest and even in the best interests of everybody, but boy, did I ever blow it. If you don't develop a very healthy discipline of being able to look back and say, maybe not so much. Maybe I need to take a look at this. Maybe I need to take a step back or turn around.
Sure.
In the old language, repent. This relationship never goes very far. And so part of the foundation, this story suggests to us is, first of all, the drama is here. Right here, the decisions we make in this life, in this world, matter a lot. That it's just as dramatic, in fact, the decisions we make that we think are so mundane. We go to a committee meeting, or we go, whatever, we have, some tiff with a coworker, or whatever. All those things actually are far energetically more powerful than we ever imagined. It's like the gods sitting around the divine council. You sit around a committee table in a board chamber of a large corporation, or even a small one, or the committee table of a church. You have all the energies present that would have been around, that the ancients would have thought, that's the divine council. Those are the gods and goddesses and stuff, and they're all right there.
There's a lot of energy in a women's luncheon, I can tell you.
Yeah, that's right. And probably dragons to be slain, and all those things. They're all right there, that our lives actually have the drama of the gods behind them, and the decisions we make matter, and because they matter, it's really, really, really important that when we discover we've made a wrong decision, to acknowledge it, turn around, come back, and do a new thing. And what Yahweh proves throughout the whole Old Testament is that when you do that, things tend to go far better. That Yahweh is far more forgiving and loving than we ever imagine.
Well, and the same would be true then if our decisions and our discernment matter, then the consequences of those decisions and discernments have high stakes.
Absolutely. Right? Really, you could look at in today's world, we should be able to see this. Really look at this narrative with eyes that are very similar to what they would have looked at the narrative at 3,000 years ago, in the sense that there's some really interesting parallels today. For instance, now with the coming of David and monotheism, the narrative shifts to the grassroots. It radically democratizes it. But in our day, now with major, huge corporations and governments and so forth, there's a real sense, kind of like, in a sense, the Hebrews from David's day would have said, oh, you guys kind of stepped backwards, haven't you? All the power's out. You think that all you can do is you are beholden to the powers that are above you to make the world work. And when you face these crises, all you can do is wait from whatever comes down from on high. It's because it's all in the hands of corporations and Congress and all these things.
We've surrendered our own authority.
And they would probably say that exact thing. Things are not what they appear, and that maybe you have more agency than other people would like you to think that you have. And take a note from our ancestors on this. When we think about the dangers we face in our world today, how undramatic is that? The fact that in the next 100, 200 years we could either destroy ourselves through environmental degradation or through violence and warfare, terrorism, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Either path, pick your poison, environment or violence. The stakes have never been higher in terms of world civilization. Individuals have always, wrestled with the risk of dying and all that, but in terms of world civilization, the drama could not be higher. Our individual decisions matter far more than we ever give it credit. And if we're going to wait until the corporations and Congress decide to make the right policies in order to fix all this, or technology or whatever it is, the Hebrews would say, oh, you should pay attention to your own power, your own agency in this.
Right.
You are living part of the story, here. So pay attention. Get right with God. Listen for God's word. The marching orders are there. The design of the house, is there. Listen for it. Carry it out. We have a role to play in these things.
And that relationship extends then to the community at large as well. How do you interact in your discernment with the community, listening to the communal voice, the common good voice, right?
Absolutely.
As well as what God is speaking to that common good.
How could David have been David without Nathan?
Exactly.
And Joab and all these others. Yeah.
Frank Schaefer might have a lot to say about that as we go forward.
Probably so. Yeah.
Well, as we're going to take a little bit of time right now, I think, to gather some questions from the folks in our coffee house, as well as from those of you that are with us online. Please let your chat administrator, Randy, know that you have a question, and he'll make sure he gets it to us. And we'll be right back with our social media. We put our thorny theological question on Facebook this week. What is the first mistake that makes the second mistake, or what's the second mistake that makes the first mistake worse? And we did get a lot of chatter out there. Tim Kerr said that the accepting the responsibility for the first mistake is the second mistake that makes the first one, to not accept it.
Not accept it, yeah.
And then Heath Johnson says not learning from the first mistake would be the second mistake, making the first one worse because it inevitably leads to be repeated again. Rochelle Stackhouse joined us and said the second mistake would be not apologizing when you have made the first mistake, right? And Keisha Parker says lying to cover up the first one. We would never do that, right?
No, I can tell no lies. Yeah.
Right.
What's
exactly.
the parent say? You lied to me. Don't lie to me. That just makes it worse.
Right.
They know what the kid's done. What have you done? They say, I've done nothing. Don't lie to me. It just makes it worse.
Yeah, nothing you can do. I always used to tell my kids the stuff that you do is not nearly as bad as the fact that you lied to me about what it was. Yeah. So that makes it even worse. And Will Ranney, who is our social media guy, social media techie dude, he wrote in and said, I want to know if doubling down, which is the phrase you used earlier, has ever worked for anyone. I've been in a couple of bad situations that I've chosen to try to change instead of just leaving, and they have worked out. So,
is that doubling down, I wonder, or is that doubling back?
Doubling back. Yeah. And it is, in fact, claiming, that you've made a mistake in order to be able to change it, right? So that the second mistake that everyone else is speaking to here didn't really happen in that doubling down. I see in that way.
Yeah. We had a lot of good discussion at the Darkwood Brew planning team this morning too. I mean, examples like, for instance, the sending those emails. You got a nasty email, then what do? You write something, and gosh, if you don't just tell yourself, don't push send. There's the second mistake. First mistake was writing the nasty return to begin with.
Right.
There's all kinds of movies and television dramas that really get into that too. Like, think of if you've seen the series Breaking Bad. That's probably the most brilliant exposition of the second mistake making the first worse, and the third making the second worse, and the fourth making the third worse. For 5 full seasons, there's not a single episode where that does not happen. He keeps trying to dig himself out, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. I think you mentioned Sons of Anarchy. I haven't seen that, but that's another one.
That's another one.
A film, Till the Devil Knows You're Dead, with Philip Seymour Hoffman, is also a great exposition of that idea. Yeah. But,
and then I Love Lucy came up too,
oh, yeah,
right?
I Love You,
that
Lucy.
was one of my my favorite.
You got some splaining to do.
do. Lucy is constantly making things worse just by
Yeah.
trying to cover up what she's already done, right?
Yeah.
So.
There is a psychological dynamic that we have, kind of neurologically, we tend to commit to that which we've made an initial commitment to. We have a lot, it takes a lot more to break that open once we've committed to it. I remember when we were, those of us with Crosswalk America were walking across the country, a political person from the political community was we had coffee with him one day. He was giving us some advice about what to do as we walked across. He said, get people just to give you $1. You don't have to give a lot, just $1. And we're like, $1? That won't pay for any walk. And he goes, no, what that does is people made a commitment, and it's much harder than it inoculates you against a lot of things.
They have a stake in it now.
They have a stake in it.
Right.
Now, so we have this bias. So because we have that bias, we also can get ourselves in trouble, though. We committed too early to something that's the wrong cause, or maybe isn't the right cause anymore, the right way to do it. Churches certainly, have made commitments in the 1950s, even that we're still trying to work out, in the 60s. What was the definition of an insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting
a
different
outcome.
results. Yes,
Yeah. Exactly.
Absolutely.
Well, we have Randy Sanders, who is working with us tonight as our chat administrator. Randy, do we have any questions from the online community?
The chat has been a little bit slow tonight. We have about a dozen or so people on the signed into chat, but we've been kind of slow. I do have one question. Given that these stories uplift people who are less than perfect, what does it say about our unique Jewish roots and our Christian faith?
Well, first of all, I want to clarify. Are you saying that only slow people are on chat tonight?
I did not say that. Those are your words.
Just one.
Send your emails to Eric Elmer.
Well, I'm thinking that whoever asked that question must have watched our last series, because we talked about the fact that God participates with created imperfect people, right? And it is imperfect people that that God chooses to be in faithful covenant with. So our Jewish and Christian heritage is, in fact, imperfect people in relationship with God who created us, right?
Yeah, and I think that you look at what's the relationship in Christianity and Judaism? It's certainly not that within the strictly Jewish time period there were all these imperfect people. Jesus comes and now, thank God, we're all better, right? It's like we're just as imperfect as before, but the revelation in Jesus is really bringing together the purest revelation from the Old Testament, even that the grace is far greater than you can imagine, far greater than you can imagine. Therefore, all the more reason to turn. When you discover you're on the wrong path, turn around. It's okay. Come back. Sometimes the best way to progress is to turn around, get on the right path, and come back. And that message is brought into with Jesus' body and blood. Even it's okay. Turn around.
And much like Nathan being able to see things in David's life that David can't see for himself, there is more than abundant grace in the lives of the Hebrew people and his Israeli roots, right? Our Hebrew roots. But we aren't necessarily seeing that. We're seeing law, and there's tons of grace and gospel in the midst of all that. And Jesus is making that perfectly clear, that there is abundance. It's not something that's altogether new, that like there wasn't grace before, but just now we're pointing back to it and saying, remember the grace that carried us through all these stories. It's the same grace that's with us now. So repentance even more important now, because the stakes are just as high.
Yeah. I sometimes get the feeling that both in the Old Testament and the New, and also, by the way, in the Quran, all three kind of have this sensibility about it, with respect to those hard texts where somebody's really calling somebody out in a pretty harsh way. I mean, this happens in the Old Testament, of course. A lot of Christians react to that, but Jesus had some pretty harsh words too. You brood of vipers. And you're like unmarked graves that people walk on, become cursed because they walked on unknowingly. Or you cross land and sea to make a single convert, but you make your converts twice the sons of hell as you are. I kind of sit up and pay attention. There's a lot of harsh words, and then you go into the Quran, a similar thing. Sometimes I have the feeling that there's kind of these two paths to awakening, and there's one path that's like, you get a glimpse of the glory and the love, and it smites you, and you orient your life to that in a significant way, and you keep on following that. But most of us, it's certainly our first turning to God doesn't come necessarily through the path of glory. It comes through the path of despair and pain. And sometimes I think that Jesus and for that matter Moses and Elijah and so forth, they're saying, in a sense, okay, if the path of glory, if the glory of it all, the wonder of it all, the beauty of it all isn't waking you up, then let me give you a picture of the kind of world that would exist if everybody were like you.
Right.
So wake up, look, here's a picture. Do you like that? Sorry,
No.
I'll do it
No,
myself.
no,
You
it's
like that? Yeah. No. And suddenly, like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize, because you just kind of extrapolate this out, 100 miles, and you see, like, oh my gosh, that's bad. I don't like it. I've woken up. Okay, what's the new way? What's the turning I need to make?
Mm-hmm. And that's where the community comes in and helps too. Like Nathan was being able to show David what the world is for him, that he was the world he was living in. He didn't even realize he was the star of that show
Right.
until Nathan pointed it out. And we have our own communities that help us, imperfect people, be able to see the things that we are blinded to, that we are blindsided by even.
Yeah.
And it gives us the chance and the opportunity then to stop and listen again and see, where is the design of this house and am I on it?
Yeah. And this whole theme is really picked up powerfully in the New Testament too, with Paul, for instance, in his first letter to the Corinthians, in the 3rd chapter, he talks about a building. He compares a relationship with God to a house too. He says, according to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation and someone else is building on it. Each builder must choose with care how to build on it. Mm-hmm. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one that has been laid. That foundation is Jesus Christ. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, or straw, the work of each builder will become visible, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed with fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each has done. If what has been built on the foundation survives, the builder will receive a reward. If the work is burned up, the builder will suffer loss. The builder will be saved, but only as through fire. I love that image. I mean, given kind of modern fundamentalistic stuff, fire is like such a negative image. Most people shut down when they hear it. But fire, really, in the Bible, is this purifying imagery too. It's what tests that house. Is it solid? And whatever isn't solid, you want it to be burned off so you can then start to build that wall again. The one that will last. So it's very much in the New Testament too, in that sense that we need to kind of wake up sometimes when we're not building according to the design. When the design that we're building actually will cause a house that will collapse on itself. We need to kind of kick out, the walls or whatever, rebuild those places.
We need to reclaim that image of fire, like we reclaim our agency in participating with God and God's design for the house, right?
Yeah.
So
the decisions we make matter.
Fire is the image, it makes.
That's right.
Well, this is a really great start to our discussion on this house that God built and dwelling within it and indwelling, right? So we have several stories coming up and some great guests to talk about it with. Frank Schaefer, Rachel Heckenberg, and Rolf Jacobson will be here with us, and then we'll have some more. We have some great bloggers as well, so...
Yeah, Leslie Merle, Ian Lynch, and I've got a blog that goes up every week too.
Yeah, Eric will be here. There they are. Great pictures of them. So we're excited for this next series. So stay with us, and we'll be back for our brouhaha. And I'm going to go grab another cookie.
All right.
Thanks.
Welcome to the brouhaha, more free frolicking discussion where and commentary from not just us but you here in the coffee house and online as well, with the idea that we'll take questions and comments about the subject of the evening, but also any theological subject about God, life, the Bible, and stuff. Chris will be answering all those questions tonight with perfect clarity and.
The cookies have given me divine light.
Yeah, I want to know what these cookies now. Now, last week when it was my sugar cookie, you didn't have any because you were on a diet. Now, I think I've counted 3 of your own cookies tonight. I'm starting to figure this out here.
Yeah.
They are
I'm
very
fasting now. I can eat cookies again.
They are very good. I think Tracy had a question that has surfaced. Tracy, where's Tracy? There she is in the back.
Here I am.
Okay.
Yeah, we have a question from Jerry here in-house.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, Jerry.
I guess it doesn't seem to get any better. This the second mistake that makes the first mistake worse. And I see us at this point in time in our modern day, we have the whole spin. Everything is being spun into whatever truth that people want, and that's particularly true in like politics. Or you have the idea that the climate change is not being really being brought about by man's changes with the earth, and the petrochemical companies saying, oh no, believe us, we've got all these people, and they say it's not, it really isn't. It just seems like it's a bigger spin, and it's so. What happens when the instead of having the truth be more important, so that you don't make the second mistake, that spin becomes more important, and that's a modern day issue and problem. Spin.
Mm-hmm. Very much so, and not just spin, but the power behind the spin. You know, so
Right.
I remember once I picked a fight with the editor of a newspaper in Scottsdale, Arizona, back in my Scottsdale days, and wrote a editorial response, and which got some play. And the former mayor of Scottsdale was in my congregation, and he said. He kind of turns to me with this little sage advice to the young buck minister. He said, "Eric, I learned in my mayoral days, never pick a fight with anybody who buys ink by the gallon." So not only can put the spin on it, but they can keep that spin going for a good long time, a lot longer than you can. And I think, Jerry, I think that's a perfect example of how one of the ancients might have said, yeah, you get what it's like in the old world that is passing away. I mean, really the Jews of 1000 years BCE, when David is operating and so forth, they really saw themselves as being part of a new order, a really true new order. I mean, that the ancient societies used to brag about how old they were, and they'd exaggerate in trending older even still. The Jews of his day actually would brag about how young they are, and if they had anything, they would tweak it younger, which is kind of like our day too. It's like for better or worse. I mean, we tend to think about new and improved is better than old and
Part
whatever.
of that spin.
Yeah, but it was part of this sense that there's a new thing going on here, and the old regime is passing away and needs to pass away, and that old regime was when we felt powerless. When those powers were really truly thought to be out of our hands, and we had actually bought into that myth. And now we've woken up, and we think our God has had something to do with this. Woken up to the fact that the power is right here. And I think that where that speaks in our day is that it's very, very, very dangerous for any of us to give up that sense, to let go of our agency into the hands of corporations, into the hands of governments and so forth, and say, well, there's nothing we can do, because history keeps proving otherwise.
Right.
When people wake up to their agency and keep proving the oligarchs and the polygarchs and all the other powers that be wrong, and to trust that this God, if this God is truly not an imbecile, and it's amazing how oftentimes we can all fall into that mentality, like, well, God, I wish God hadn't been so naive. Like, couldn't God have thought that maybe we'd have this ecological crisis and the crisis of violence if technology kind of kept going? would that God have thought of that? Well, maybe God has thought about these things, and maybe God is actually at work in this world. I mean, we just woke up to our ecological crisis in world time about 30 seconds ago, right? And so we're really actually, even though the time is running out fast, we've only been aware of this crisis as a true crisis for a very short period of time. Well, if God is truly a God who is powerful enough to create this world and so forth, God is probably also one who's wise enough to know that there are powers that can be tapped into. And probably I think the whole energy of the Holy Spirit actually right now is going in that direction. That when we actually move with that flow to a greater sustainability ecologically and also waging peace, that actually the energy we put into that now is actually being doubled and tripled of what it was even just a few years ago. I think the energy of the Spirit is moving in that direction. And so we trust that. And so we keep on clearing it up as individuals. What is my role? What is the next step you want me to take? And trust that if we can just be in community together and keep growing that sensibility of following the Spirit, that we have amazing agency. And those little decisions we make on local levels can add up to very big decisions made up on very national levels. That was one of I don't want to belabor this point, don't want to speak too long, but this is what the genius, I think, of the fundamentalists in the 1970s is that they kind of realized that the powers and principalities, of the political world and the corporate world had gotten away. Like the average person had very little agency, but rather than give up hope, what they did actually was brilliant in hindsight. What they did was to say, well, let's, instead of pouring all, this changed in the 80s, by the way, so this won't sound like what's been being done in recent history. But they said, let's give up on national politics, basically, I mean, for all practical purposes, and let's really put our energy into who's on the school board, in our local community, and who's on, these local decisions, because that's where we have agency, and that's where we know our decisions matter. And they did that for a decade or so, and pretty soon there was so much political power. That's when the big powers from government and corporations said, hey, they noticed and say, hey, let's go to bed together. Let's have a relationship, and that took that thing into the national sphere. Okay. Well, they may have diagnosed the problem, accurately, but they gave some wrong prescriptions, to that. But the genius of that, I think, is, I think it comes right out of the Bible.
Well, I think that one of the discussions we had in the planning team meeting too was on the ability to get around something. So instead of claiming our mistakes or admitting that we could be going in the wrong direction and turning around and going a different way, what we find out is, well, okay, that one didn't really quite work out, but how can we get around that? Or this rule makes sense in some ways, but I'm sure I can get around that. So instead of claiming the mistake and getting counsel on how we can make this better, we just tend to get around it. And we aren't. That is a spin of its own, like Jerry was saying, and we aren't even looking for sustainable solutions to things. We're just going for that short-term getting around things.
Yeah.
If we're screwing up this world, our environment's going to hell, then we can just move to Mars, or
That's right.
something like that. We're not looking for sustainable futures, and I think that's a mistake that is constantly, we had the mistake in the first place for not recognizing what we're doing to the environment, and then we're making a second decision that's making things worse by ignoring that and finding a way around it.
Right. So we in the faith community really, I think, have two roles. One is to be like Nathan, say, right. Truth to power. Sure. What are you doing? What do you think? But also there's the other piece, and actually the progressive Christian kind of sphere in general has done a lot of good work in that area, kind of the calling truth to power. But where it hasn't been very good is the second move, which is to claim our agency. Instead of just simply decrying what other people are doing, to say, we're agents here. What's the positive thing that we're putting together then that's the alternative to this, that will, that's the persuasive alternative, so that when it comes out that you're Christian in the world, that the first three things that people think about is, oh, you're about waging peace. You're about finding your calling in life, and trusting that the average person's ministry, vocation as a ministry is a ministry, and you're about environmental reconciliation with the earth too. Reconciliation with God through your vocation, reconciliation with your neighbor through peace waging, and reconciliation with the earth. Like those, if, in the next century, those are the three things that Christians need to be known for. Immediately, the average person, when it comes to their mind, that's what they're known for.
So we don't have to apologize anymore. That would be great.
No apologize.
No apologize.
And the reason why people will know it, because they'll see so many acts of doing those very things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That would be amazing. Tracy is here with us. I believe she has a question in the coffee house.
Yeah, we've had some good discussion here in the room, and this is a spin on our thorny theological question for the evening.
Good spin, though, right?
It's good spin. It's interesting. It's very interesting spin. I'll be interested to hear what you have to say. If David had not been revealed with Bathsheba, how would we have gotten Solomon for the next king?
God brings all things together for good. You want to quote that one?
Yeah, actually, you keep going. You're on a roll.
I don't know exactly how to answer this other than from my own personal kind of understanding of things. When I think about my conversation with God, which is, you know, how I live my life and how I make my decisions about things, how I picture it is not, you know, in this linear, straight timeline kind of a thing, you know. This was my history, this is my present, this is my future, and if I get it all right with God, then I'm going to go to heaven and live happily ever after. But rather, it's more in this kind of a spiral thing where, you know, God, I listen and God says something, and I try to respond in a way that I think is faithful. More often than not, that ends up in those first or second mistakes. And then God responds to what I've done, you know, and then I respond again. And it's this ongoing conversation. And the predestination is not that there's an end point that we're trying to get to, but rather that God loves me in this conversation. And therefore, as I'm trying to discern and listening for God, even when I make mistakes, God stays in that relationship with me and works with me in my imperfections and in my mistakes to move the world forward into a place of love and peace. That sounds like a really great formula, right? But it's something that I think is lived out over and over again in the history of the Bible and the lived experiences of the Hebrews. When we mess things up, God is in it with us, and God is responding to that. So David sleeps with Bathsheba, and we get Solomon. But how is Solomon then brought into the good of what God is trying to do with the world?
Yeah. Now, to be clear, Solomon is the product of David and Bathsheba, but that the first child, the child that was made pregnant when he was married to Uriah Hittite, died in just a matter of days after birth. This is an eventual reality, but it's not the one. And one could argue also, had David not repented, had David not, you know, also turned himself
That's
back,
true.
there would have been no Solomon, you know, also likely, and brought blessing into that relationship. If we have to wait until we are perfect for God to move us forward, we're going to be waiting a long time.
And I wouldn't say that God plans for things like this to happen so that we can get something good out of it, but rather because things happen, God moves it all together toward good. That's a whole different way of looking at it. That's not a predestination point or a God doing things no matter what we do. That's God working with us in creation, constantly creating.
Yeah. I look back at my own path. Some of the things that I'm most happy with about my life are the direct results of failures and mistakes I made and learned from in the past. You know, too. So we never want to make those mistakes, and we can never look back and say, well, because this happened, that's now good.
Right.
You know, but we can say, because this happened, it let me, you know, this bad thing happened, it also somehow got wrapped up in something that led to good. But it still doesn't make the good.
Well, it opened my eyes to seeing who I was becoming in a way that I wouldn't have seen before. That leads me in a new direction now rather than in that same old spiral, right? So it doesn't mean it's not a mistake. It doesn't mean that I want to do it again, but rather it opens my eyes into how I'm participating in the world and makes me aware of it. Just like Nathan being able to tell David, what are you doing?
Yeah. Oh, I was trying to find, I see there's a discussion about a ewe lamb, but I can't find the root of the discussion. Was that something that was come up online? The question of the lamb in the story? Or?
Well, actually we have Another question in the room here.
Oh, okay.
So we've been talking a lot tonight about what I would call like the momentum of doing the wrong thing, and how the first mistake leads to the second mistake, or how a second mistake of maybe not taking responsibility for something can actually makes the second mistake a greater mistake than the first one. I'm just interested to hear from you. Is there a momentum to making the right decision and doing the right kinds of things? And does it work in a sort of similar but opposite way as many things do in life? Does a good decision build upon a good decision, build upon a good decision? And just what's your experience with that?
I'm going to take a politically incorrect approach to that one. I'm going to say, yeah, I think actually it's harder to build the momentum around a good decision than a bad decision. That actually, the work that we would advocate is actually makes it harder, puts you into an energy that's harder to sustain. And the reason that is because you start making bad decisions. Bad decisions are bad in the sense that they always restrict your free will. They restrict your even abilities. They restrict your pool of available reality in which you ought to operate, make it increasingly more narrow. And so you have less and less choice in the matter. You have less and less options, and so you tend to make more and more bad decisions. Whereas you make good decisions, make that good decision meaning not even in a strict moral sense. It's talking about good decisions about trying to follow where Spirit leads. It always puts you in a place of higher freedom, where your free will is actually more authentic, and so your choices are always broader and broader and broader, and so hopefully because your available stock reality is bigger, you'll make better and better decisions. But it also means you're freer to make bad ones, in a sense. So I think it is harder to sustain that energy. That's why the world isn't just simply rolling in ecstasy of how wonderful we are and so forth. That sometimes we move back. But I don't know, what do you think?
But I think that's part of our response. I think you're right. But part of our responsibility, and part of that, it takes a village thing, is that when we do see something, a good decision that's being made, even if it's not recognizable, even if it's not making, headlines or big changes in the world immediately, that our role is, when we recognize that, to fan that flame. You talk about fanning the flames all the time. Mm-hmm. When you see something good, then you raise that up in people. You look for what is the divine in each person, and keep talking that up and try to bring that out in the other. That's part of our relationship with the other. Mm. And that's our role as participating in this life with God, with each other, is when we do see those things, that we are the agents that fan that flame and encourage it in other people.
Yeah, I'm kind of starting to disagree with my own first response, actually.
Yeah, go ahead. You're allowed to repent.
Okay, No, I'm going to keep. No, I was right. Let me tell you. I don't know. Maybe there's more to it than that, because I start thinking about, well, wait a minute. In relation, this whole thing about faith is relational. And so. Yeah. Think about human relationships, that actually there's a cumulative benefit to keeping, these positive right decisions being made, and it actually helps you make the next right decision too. So there's that aspect. You have greater freedom, but you also, to make bad decisions, but that relational sense, that time and momentum, I think, maybe, in certain respects makes it easier. So I guess. And
that sophistication, or that maturity, maybe is a better word. As you accumulate more and more lived experiences, then the time that it takes you to recognize when you're swimming upstream or when you're moving in the wrong direction, I think shortens. So in that sense, you recognize sooner. You're more progressive, right? Because you're the one that changes, right? Yeah. That's what that quote was saying. If you can turn around quicker than the other person, then that makes you more progressive. And I think maturity lends itself to that. And being a part of a community where you recognize the response that people give to certain situations is what fans those flames as well.
Yeah. Well, bottom line, I think it comes down to Luther, doesn't it? I mean, you're a Lutheran. You would agree with that.
Well, I think everything comes down to Luther.
It's bottom line, in a sense, it's make right decision, wrong decision, sin boldly. Make a bold decision for the good, for the bad. Don't make this waffle in between thing. It's like the boat that's in motion is easier to steer. If you make the wrong decision, whether it be for the right reasons, you're trying to make a right decision, you make a mistake, or you just say, no, I'm getting the hell out of Dodge, and I'm gonna, whatever it is, do it bold enough so that the pain will become great enough that you start turning, you'll know it. And that way,
Well,
if you
and
make...
you're boldly trusting that God's in this with you.
Yeah.
Right? And that God, in fact, is
Absolutely.
moving everything together for the good of things.
Absolutely,
Right?
yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
I think we are out of
To a
time.
point
or we have,
of...
Oh, okay. I'm being told it's time to take a quick
communion.
break, and we'll come back with communion. So if you happen to have bread and wine or juice and crackers available online tonight, we invite you to join us in just a moment as we celebrate this final feast and really bring this whole episode, really the themes of it, right together.
Thank you.
All right. Well, we've been observing how that ancient context went from the drama of the heavens come down to earth with from polytheism to monotheism. That's the whole drama shifts and shows that the things that we do in the daily activities become of far greater importance than we ever realized. And I can think of no other act in Christendom that echoes that sensibility more strongly than the meal that we have here. And the reason why we are celebrating here, in which we remember one in whom God came, but in the form that was holy, divine, and yet wholly human. Heavens come to earth. And this was not some disembodied spirit that was related, a revelation. This was a revelation of a human one. Who said then on the night of betrayal and desertion, my friends, this is my body which is broken for you. Do this as often as you eat of this bread in remembrance of me. And so likewise after supper he took the cup, saying, this is the cup of the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink of it in remembrance of me. By eating this bread and drinking this cup, we remember Christ's death. We celebrate Christ's resurrection. And we also come to know that God is truly saying to us, the action is right here. Whenever you break bread and drink from the cup, remember that all the drama of this meal is wherever you are in your relationships. And that even in your brokenness, God is present. And you have the ability anew to make the next right decision. These are the gifts of God for the people of God. I invite you to enjoy the feast, the bread of life, the cup of blessing. thanks, Steve Gomez, for joining us at the last minute tonight. It's been a pleasure. And looking forward to seeing you all again next week. We have a surprise guest, so we're not announcing that tonight because we're still emailing back and forth with that. So, but if this person commits, it's going to be a freaking fantastic guest. So, yeah, looking forward to that. But until then, my friends, may the Spirit of the living God, made known to us most fully in Jesus Christ our Lord, go before you to show you the way, go above you to watch over you, go behind you to push you into those places you may not necessarily go yourself. You don't have to go yourself, because this God will also go beneath you to uphold you and uplift you, go beside you to be your strong and constant companion, and dwell within you to remind you that you are surely not alone on this journey. You are loved beyond your wildest imagination. And may the fire of God's blessing burn brightly upon you and within you, now and always. Amen.
In the middle of the forest, under the shadows of the trees, I had wandered through the darkness until the way was lost to me. And it was there I heard a calling, and it was there I found belief. It was then that I found courage in the hour of my need. And I walk on foot with the faith and trust to guide me through the darkest wood, dark wood. In the valley of the shadows, there is nothing I shall fear, 'cause if the dark should overwhelm